Hi guys, Tim Montgomerie, the head of Conservative Home, a pro-Tory website, has tried in the past to present himself as someone balanced, critical even of Tory MPs and the government. However, since Labour took over, he's proved himself to be just a hack for the party. As we know, the previous government was not interested in avoiding or ending strikes, because it was in their interest to see trade unions and workers blamed for poor levels of service. They preferred to pump taxpayer money into the private sector than see staff in the rail network, the NHS and civil service be paid decent wages. Here Tim tries to suggest that the reason Keir Starmer is doing badly in the polls is because he has given in to trade union demands.
But the big set piece of this government was that statement in the House of Commons at the end of July from Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor. There's no money left. She said things are awful. But then, to say that and then give these inflation-busting pay awards to train drivers and the public sector union, it was a very bad first impression to give. And I think it's absolutely the fundamental reason why that graph that you just put up there is as bad as it is. And Chris is a former pollster, and he's doing a very good job at spinning that poll, but that's a bad poll. And look, it's a little bit like a teacher in the first day of school. If you're soft in front of your classroom on the first day, they'll never respect you or gain the authority afterwards. It's very difficult. What Labour have done is not just the fact that these set of pay awards are going to cost £6-7 billion that won't be helping pensioners, heat their homes this winter. It's because every public sector union now in the country looks at this government and thinks they're a soft touch. Chris? So they're now going to have to establish their strength in a way that they've thrown away in these first 2 weeks. That's the danger.
Strikes are expensive as well.
I think it would be really deeply irresponsible, actually, to do two things. One of those things would be to allow these strikes to continue, given the billions and billions of pounds they're costing the economy, but not just the economy, but people's lives that have been lost in our National Health Service because of many reasons, and further strikes would have not helped that. I think one of the most important things that we can do for economic growth in this country is get down NHS waiting lists. Because there's people that are not going into work because they're stuck on NHS waiting lists, and I'm not going to apologise for making sure that we come to an agreement with doctors and nurses to get them back into our hospitals so we can start getting down those waiting lists again. And on top of that, what we've seen over the past 14 years is real dramatic, real terms cuts to our NHS paid staff. And one of the consequences of that has been a dramatic shortage of nurses and doctors in this country. Now, if you run a business, and I've worked in the private sector all my life, and you've got a big shortage of staff, one of the things that you do is you don't go, what the previous Conservative government wanted to do, well, let's do another real terms cut to those staff we've got a massive shortage of. What you do is you come up with a plan in order to start getting the staff back into our National Health Service that we need, and I'll make no apologies for doing that.
Now, Chris Curtis from Labour here is correct. You need to be focusing on the strikes. You need to avoid the strikes because that's a massive cost to the exchequer. And of course, it sours relations between the government and workers. Now, why is support for Keir Starmer dropping? Well, the Tory narrative is that he's no longer popular, and he's no longer popular because he has given in to the trade unions. This is the narrative that they have been pushing. And Starmer and Labour are sort of losing control of the narrative. The Tories are picking it up and they're using it as a stick to beat the new government with. What they're being successful with is using this idea that Starmer is listening to the trade unions and not listening to the poorest in society or listening to pensioners in particular. So he's punishing pensioners and at the same time handing over money to his cronies. Now, that's not, of course, what's happening, but that's the narrative. And if Labour want to hold on to power, they need to take control of the narrative. I really think it was a bad idea, politically, to have this means-tested system where you support some pensioners and you don't support other pensioners with the winter fuel allowance. Now, it's a disgrace that we're focusing just on pensioners and not on everyone who's struggling at the moment. Why are pensioners being prioritised? Because the Conservatives care more about pensioners, or their vote, than they do about anyone else. So, once again, the Conservatives are setting the narrative. Now, there are other reasons why Starmer's support has dropped. The honeymoon period is over. When a new government takes over, support for the Prime Minister generally drops anyway. It didn't really happen with Boris Johnson because Brexit was still on the front pages and the country was pretty polarised. But Starmer has taken over. He was a replacement for the Tories. People voted against the Tories. They were not so much supporting Labour. They were voting against the Conservative Party and against 14 years of Tory rule. And I keep saying this, it's a referendum on the incumbent. People were not happy with the Tories. They wanted anyone else. And of course, whilst support for Starmer at the beginning was pretty good because he was talking a good game, the riots came along, and then this winter fuel allowance issue, I think, is eating into his support. Now, what Labour could do to turn things around would be to abandon this means-tested policy. Look, economically, you can make an argument for it, but politically, the Tories are using it as a stick to beat the Labour government, and they will continue to do so. So, from a political point of view, I think they need to do a U-turn on this. They will get criticised for the U-turn, but the story will go away. Because the narrative the Tory media and the Conservative Party are using is Labour are listening to their cronies in the trade unions, and they're not listening to ordinary voters. They're more concerned about keeping rail workers happy, or rail drivers happy, or doctors and nurses happy than they are about pensioners. And while the number of pensioners that vote for the Labour Party is pretty low, it's the narrative in society, and this is, of course, harming Labour at the moment. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.